On screen, she is a flame-haired beauty with a piercing gaze and flawless skin. In the public imagination, she is either a seductive diva or a cunning sorceress weaving a web of intrigue. Popular culture has molded Hurrem Sultan into a mythical figure. Her appearance has become a projection of our fantasies about the Orient, power, and the femme fatale. But if we push aside the velvet curtains of the TV series and discard the romantic 19th century engravings, what remains? Who is looking at us from the yellowed pages of diplomatic dispatches and the faint brushstrokes of a court painter? The truth is, we will not find her photograph. There is no lifetime portrait painted from life. What we have is a historical detective story, where the clues are three types of evidence, each with its own point of view and its own bias. The first witnesses are European diplomats and travelers. When describing Hurrem, they were pursuing their own agendas. Some needed to emphasize her influence to explain the failures of their policies. The Sultan is blinded by the charms of a cunning concubine. Others sought to diminish her, calling her plain or a witch to conceal their frustration at her diplomatic victories. Their words are always a mirror of their fears and interests. The second source is Ottoman miniatures. Here, realism does not reign, but symbolism and hierarchy do. Hurrem's face is often stylized, her figure concealed beneath lavish robes. What matters is not the shape of her eyes, but her position. This is a canonical image of power, not a photographic record.
The third layer is the late portraits and legends. The famous image of the red-haired Roxolana was born decades, even centuries after her death. This is a pure product of myth-making. European artists, who had never been to Istanbul, painted portraits of the Ottoman Sultana, guided by fashionable clichés about exotic beauty and their own imaginations. Thus, we have three layers of distortion: political propaganda, courtly protocol, and romantic fiction. Penetrating through them is a task of jeweler-like precision. But we can find something incredibly valuable here: the contours of a personality imprinted on history. This journey is not a search for indisputable facts, but a sober analysis of probabilities. We will go behind the scenes of myths to separate the woman from the legend and the politician from the melodramatic character. Ready to see what the myth conceals? But history is not a one-season series. Behind the scenes of great events, passions always simmer, the kind they don't write about in textbooks. Subscribe. On this channel, we continue to peel away layers of varnish and conjecture from historical figures, turning legends back into people. Every subscription warms our souls and helps make the next videos better and more interesting. By the mid-1520s, a cold conflict was brewing in the Topkapi harem. On one side stood Mahidevran Sultan, mother of Shehzadeh Mustafa, the firstborn heir. Her position seemed unshakable: the eldest son, years by the Sultan's side, the support of the old harem elite. On the other side stood a new favorite, that upstart Slav concubine. She had neither clan nor connections behind her, only a quick mind, a melodious voice, and a trait rare for an odalisque. She did not merely bear children, she transformed each birth into a political act.
With each pregnancy, her status changed, from Iqbal, the fortunate one who bore a child, to Hasiki, a favorite with special privileges. And then something happened that had not occurred for 2 centuries. Suleiman married, officially with a lavish ceremony in 1534. This marriage was not a romantic gesture, it was a political move. The Sultan, who positioned himself as the lord of the world, stepped outside the system where his women were nameless mothers of his children. Hürrem was now not a concubine, but a legal wife, a free woman, and thus a political subject. Waqf documents, something akin to medieval charitable foundations, began to be peppered with her name alongside the Sultan's. She was weaving herself into the sacred and urban fabric of the empire, becoming its patroness.
Her power grew not in the silence of the chambers, but in the thick of events. While Suleiman waged war against the Persian Shah Tahmasp, Hürrem remained in Istanbul. She did not rule directly, that was impossible, but she managed the channel of communication. Letters to the Sultan passed through her. She was his eyes and ears in the capital, filtering information, shaping the agenda. The Venetian ambassador Pietro Bragadin wrote that the Sultan loves her so much that he has broken all customs, and now no one dares speak with him without first securing her support. It was then that the all-powerful Grand Vizier Ibrahim Pasha fell, Suleiman's childhood friend, who had once facilitated her rise. His execution in 1536 is a classic court drama. An intrigue involving envy of his power, his failed foreign policy, and, perhaps, the quiet whisper of the Sultan's wife, who saw in him a threat to her sons. Hürrem had 5 sons, 5 candidates for the greatest prize, the Ottoman throne, and one monumental threat, the Battle of the Heirs, became the center of her life.
Her legacy lies not in her facial features, but in the shattered mold. She transformed the harem from the dynasty's nursery workshop into a center of political influence. After her came Nurbanu, Safiye, Kosem, mighty Valide sultans ruling from behind the curtains. She was the first version of the system called the Sultanate of Women. And herein lies her true historical portrait, not the red-haired beauty from a miniature, but the architect of a new form of power, chiseled from the most unyielding marble of Ottoman tradition. The Venetian ambassador was perhaps the first European to seriously document her phenomenon. In 1521-22, squinting with political curiosity, he noted the Sultan's strange behavior. He visited the old palace where the women lived too often. For the pragmatic Venetian, the logic was simple: lust. But by 1524, the picture clarified. Night after night, Suleiman spent time with the same concubine. Making his note, the ambassador dropped a key phrase. She was not particularly beautiful, but a charming Slav with lively eyes. 30 years pass. An Austrian ambassador, a learned and meticulous man, arrives in Constantinople. He finds Hürrem not as a rising star, but as a powerful sultana, a woman over 50. And his description is the work of a biologist. A small woman with white skin, reddish hair, and green eyes. Her charm lies in her wit, not her figure. The phrase, charm in her wit, not her figure, sounds like a verdict. Her power never lay in perfect proportions. It lay in a mind packaged in a form unusual for the harem. The Venetians, masters of espionage and trade, always valued details. Hürrem is thin, of medium height, with red hair which she covers with a turban. Her face is pleasant but not perfect, her eyes lively, possibly green. Pause on this phrase. Pleasant but not perfect. This is the anti-myth. The glittering, bejeweled serial image shatters against the simple words of an eyewitness. But then the diplomat captures what cannot be caught in a miniature: her pleasant voice and manners. She was different. She sounded different, moved differently, gazed differently. The Venetian envoy, Domenico Bergalini, whose dispatches lay buried in archives for centuries, looked upon the Sultana not with the adoring eyes of a fan, but with the cold gaze of a professional diplomat. His verdict is one of exposure, and it begins with dry statistics. Height, approximately 1.5 meters. In a harem full of slender, meticulously trained girls, she did not stand tall. She was lost. Next to Mahidevran, whose posture and stature, it seems, matched the Ottoman canon of beauty, Hürrem, in his words, was far from a beauty. But Bergalini does not stop at generalities.
He launches the process of demythologization with frightening detail. He speaks of her figure, not merely mature, but gone to flesh. Of her face, not with perfect proportions, but with indistinct features. He pointedly notes a large, round nose. He describes not shining eyes, but small, deep-set eyes, thin lips, and light, nearly invisible eyebrows on a round face. This is a portrait not of an icon, but of an ordinary, no longer young woman whose appearance had long ceased to be her primary weapon.
Then comes the final, almost anecdotal stroke, shattering any notions of palace primness. The lady, the ambassador writes, was passionately fond of eating, and she did so with such gusto that she forgot courtly etiquette. Bits of food in the corners of her mouth, stains on luxurious fabrics, a picture worthy of a comic sketch, not a chronicle of the Sultan's court. Yet the most fantastic fact in this story is the reaction of Suleiman. The sovereign of the world, whose gaze made viziers tremble, seemed simply not to notice these minor, human flaws. For him, they did not exist. It is a blindness granted by only one thing, absolute, all-consuming infatuation. And here, dropping the mask of the cynical observer, Bergolini delivers the main key to unraveling the Hurrem phenomenon. Appearance was secondary. Her true weapon was the universe inside her skull. She could brilliantly discuss the subtleties of Quranic interpretations and a minute later wittily comment on the latest intrigues at the Habsburg court. A mind, sharp, flexible, inquisitive. Shrewdness that allowed her to circumvent any trap. And that very cheerful disposition, the spark that did not go out under the weight of power. Suleiman the Magnificent, weary of servility and predictability, found in her more than just a woman. He found an interlocutor, a partner, a source of energy and intellectual challenge. Bergolini, in essence, describes the most ancient alchemy of passion, when physical attraction is transformed into something unbreakable, into a need of the mind, a hunger for a kindred spirit. She captivated him not with her features, but with her train of thought, not with a perfect profile, but with an unpredictable joke. Ottoman sources are quieter on domestic details. For a chronicler, the Sultan's woman is more a force of nature than a person, but even here characteristics break through. And then there are the voices of opponents. For those who adored the executed Shehzade Mustafa, Hurrem was a demoness. They called her the Russian witch with the cunning gaze. But even in this malicious description, one detail is important, the cunning gaze. Her enemies, too, confirm her power was in her eyes. They were so expressive that they could be interpreted as lively by allies and cunning by foes. Here is a simple 16th-century formula. Take one real person, add a pinch of rumors, a handful of political hysteria, and spin it through the printing press. The result is the European image of Hurrem Sultan. Forget about seeking the truth. Western engravers were creating not portraits, but ammunition for an information war. While in the Ottoman Empire, Hurrem was depicted with calligraphic restraint, a silhouette in noble robes, a face devoid of emotion, in Europe a veritable carnival of fantasy began. The goal was clear, to turn the Sultana into a symbol of threat, of debauchery, of the cunning East poised to devour the Christian world, or conversely, into an icon for secular chronicles if, like the French king, yours was friends with the Sultan. A separate story is that of French glamour. After Francis I and Suleiman formed an alliance against their common enemy, the Habsburgs, the propaganda machine abruptly changed its tune. Hurrem was transformed from a demoness into a blonde queen of the East. Parisian engravers depicted a stately, almost goddess-like figure with perfect features. They deliberately ignored reports of her slenderness and short stature.
An ally deserved an image of grace and strength, not a small, energetic woman as she had been described.
These engravings did more than distort her appearance. They created a cultural template that endured for centuries. Polish literature borrowed the image of the Golden Maiden, German literature that of a demon in silks, and modern TV series, with their love for red-haired beauties in lavish attire, are direct heirs to those very 16th century European engravings. Europe never saw the real Hürrem. It created and disseminated its own fear, envy, and bewilderment, packaging them in the form of a red-haired seductress with large eyes. The truth remained behind the walls of Topkapi, while a bright, vivid, and utterly false myth triumphed through European fairs and salons. 16th century Europe was hungry for sensation. The story of Hürrem was a perfect plot, a harem and the pinnacle of power. With no access to the original, Western artists launched a conveyor belt for producing her images. The first engravings were born not in Istanbul, but in the workshops of Venice and Antwerp. Their authors worked on the principle of broken telephone. They heard from a diplomat that the sultana was reddish-haired, added a dash of their own fantasy about Eastern opulence, and the myth began to take shape. And now the main plot twist. Enter Titian, a genius who had never seen the Ottoman Empire. How did he get commissioned to paint a portrait of Hürrem? Legend has it the order came through Venetian merchants seeking to flatter Sultan Suleiman or his viziers. But Titian had no model, not even a clear description. What does a genius do in such a situation? He takes the path of genius. He paints an idea. The idea of a beautiful, powerful Eastern ruler. Art historians scrutinizing this portrait agree the facial features are pure Titian. The recognizable line of the cheeks, the shape of the lips, it is the face of his daughter Lavinia, whom he painted repeatedly. Thus, the most famous portrait of Hürrem is essentially an Eastern costume draped over the artist's beloved model. He sold the world not a real woman, but a brilliant counterfeit, sanctioned by his name.
The fate of Titian's original is a thriller in itself. It vanished, dissolved into history like so many masterpieces. All that remains are mentions in correspondence and a few later copies, the most famous of which today hides not in Istanbul or Venice, but in sunny Florida, at the Ringling Museum. The irony of fate, an image created for the Ottoman court found its refuge in the New World, becoming an object of admiration for tourists far removed from the intrigues of Topkapi. So, what came next? The 17th and 18th centuries only replicated and deepened the original era. Each new artist painting Roxolana relied not on truth, but on previous fantasies. In paintings, she appears as a full-figured brunette in a huge turban, then as a fragile blonde with a melancholic gaze. Often they scarcely resemble one another. They are united only by a set of clichés: pearls, velvet, a mysterious gaze into the distance. There is no authentic life portrait of Hurrem Sultan painted from life. There are only layers of myth, applied one over another over the centuries. Titian created not a portrait, but a brand. European engravers created not a chronicle, but propaganda. We search for a face, but find a mirror in which the West for centuries reflected its own fears, admiration, and fantasies about the mysterious East. Her true visage has remained forever behind a veil. The casting of Meryem Uzeli in the role of the young Anastasia Hurrem was not just a success, but a stroke of marketing genius. It took the vague hints from 16th century diplomatic correspondence and turned them into a fiery visual image. Let's recall what Ambassador Busbeck wrote. The captive's hair was reddish. The series translation of this phrase is an atomic explosion, not modest copper strands, but flame. Not simply red-haired, but dazzlingly red-haired. After that, millions of viewers worldwide simply could not imagine Hürrem any other way. But the series went beyond simple hyperbole. It created the perfect biological incongruity, rendering the image mythical. According to the canons of drama, the heroine must stand out, and she did. She became the visual icon of the other, the not from here. Her fiery hair against Mahidevran's jet-black tresses, her green eyes versus the dark, almost coal-like gazes of the harem inhabitants, her porcelain skin, unafraid of either the Mediterranean sun or the nerves of intrigue. This is not a portrait of a real woman. This is the creation of the Hurrem brand, a living logo that is impossible to forget. The costume department, led by the series designer, became a veritable status manufacturing machine. Each new outfit of Hurrem is not just a dress, it is a gesture and an ultimatum stitched from velvet and silk. From the modest garments of a concubine to those mind-bending caftans embroidered with so much pearl that it seems about to tear under its own weight. Historical accuracy here is tightly kneaded with glamour. Yes, the forms and silhouettes are recognizable, but the color palette? It screams from the screen with poisonous emeralds, deep purples, and golden hues that in the 16th century cost entire fortunes. The series makes them an everyday norm, turning every scene with Hurrem into a fashion show of the Ottoman court. The recasting of the actress to Vahide Perçin in the role of the mature sultana could have been a risk, but the creators cleverly turned it into an advantage. If Meryem Uzerli played the Dawn, a captivating, irresistible youth, then Vahide embodied the sun at its zenith. Her Hurrem is not an aging woman, but a monument. Her features became sharper, her gaze heavier and more piercing. Her figure, although fuller in accordance with descriptions, remained encased in those same impeccable contours, emphasizing power, not decline. The series allowed the heroine to gray only symbolically, adding a couple of silver threads to the luxurious hairstyles, but categorically refused to show exhaustion, wrinkles, or traces of illness. The real Hürrem, who survived 6 pregnancies, political upheavals, and a long illness, was far from the ideal by the end of her life, according to contemporaries. But the series offered an alternative universe where the Sultan's love is a source of eternal youth. It sold us not a history, but a dream. A dream that one can be cunning, powerful, walking through fire and water, and yet remain flawlessly beautiful, with perfect makeup in every scene. But let us return to the historical context of Hürrem's appearance. Point 1. The Venetian envoy. Their words can be trusted, but with one caveat. They were describing not just a woman, but a phenomenon. And here the confusion begins. One speaks of a graceful blonde, another of a reddish-haired captive with a sly smile. Why the discrepancy? Imagine you are describing the most influential woman in the empire, whom you glimpsed from a distance, in a crowd, or through hearsay. You are not writing a photographic report, but assembling a composite image of that Slavic woman, fair, unlike Turkish women, striking. Blonde, in the mouth of a 16th century Venetian, is a generalized label for a light-haired foreigner. That matters more than the precise shade. Point 2, and key, the voice of Suleiman himself. The Sultan poet, writing under the pen name Muhibi, left us love lyrics. This is not evidence for a court of law, but a cry from the heart. And there he calls her my orange. Forget the fruit basket. In Ottoman poetic tradition, this is a deep sensual metaphor. An orange is the color of dawn, a blush, the warmth of a living, ripe fruit. It is not blonde or fiery copper, it is a radiant, golden russet, warm hue, the very one that appears golden at dawn and coppery by candlelight. Suleiman was not describing her passport, he was describing her glow.
Point 3. The genetic clue. Her son, Salim, nicknamed Sari, blonde or fair-haired. This is often cited as ironclad proof.
If the son was blonde, then the mother must have been blonde too. But genetics is not mathematics, it is a lottery. Even two dark-haired parents can have a fair-haired child, a manifestation of hidden ancestral genes. But there is a more elegant explanation. In people with red or light brown hair, pigment often fades with age. Young Selim may have been light red-haired, and by adulthood his hair could have darkened or lightened even further. His nickname is not his mother's label, it is his own calling card. And so we come to the central myth, the myth of plainness. This is not a description of appearance. When a woman rises from slave to co-ruler, breaks centuries-old traditions, marries the Sultan, and influences foreign policy, she cannot help but make enemies. And how to strike at her? Naturally, by the book. She isn't even beautiful. She must have bewitched him. Words about an ugly or small and thin woman are not a portrait. They are an accusation of witchcraft. They are an attempt to explain the inexplicable to a traditional society, how a woman could attain such power through intellect and will. It is easier to brand her a witch. So visually, who was she then? If we discard the extremes, neither the poster red beastess of the series nor the sterile blonde from diplomatic reports, the image becomes far more subtle and human. Most likely, she was a woman with light hair of that changeable shade poets call golden and diplomats confuse between light brown and reddish. Her eyes were most probably light, blue, green, or gray, which, against the backdrop of a dark-eyed court, produced an effect of sincere, piercing novelty. Her smile, noted by many, was her primary weapon, a vibrant, conscious instrument of charm.
And here a ghostly parallel emerges. If we were to seek an actor's embodiment that corresponds most closely to this collective psychological truth rather than hair color, it might perhaps be Vahid Perchin in the role of the mature Hurrem. Not because she is blonde or redhead, but because in her performance there was not mere beauty, but a commanding texture. The sharpness of her features, the penetrating gaze that conveyed intelligence, weariness, and an iron will. Such a woman has no need for garish colors. Her strength lies in her presence, and it was this presence, not a mythical hair color, that drove poets mad, frightened diplomats, and rewrote the history of an empire. So, what do we have in the end? A portrait painted by rumors, an icon molded from contradictions, a face that almost no one saw. History did not leave us her photograph, it left us a dilemma. On one hand, enthusiastic diplomats, mesmerized by her intellect and charm, their pens scribbling epithets like graceful and enchanting. But these are words from the arsenal of courtly flattery, a standard set for describing a royal favorite. On the other hand, the acerbic Venetian ambassadors, who later dubbed her not beautiful but with elegant manners. But here it is worth remembering whose interests they represented. Her enemies could not defeat her through influence, so they attacked her image. Between these poles lie cold facts. Not a single lifetime portrait painted from life is known. All those engravings in European books are fantasies on an exotic theme, products of the demand for sensation. The Ottoman tradition, in turn, fundamentally avoided realistic portraiture, preferring conventional miniatures, where the face is a symbol of status, not a set of features. But there is one witness that cannot be bribed or deceived: time, captured in bones. Her tomb near the Suleymaniye mausoleum awaits. Modern anthropology today is capable of wonders. Scanners, 3D modeling, DNA analysis that would tell not only of facial features, but also of diseases, origins, diet. Theoretically, we could see not just a reconstruction, but an almost photographic bust. Learn the shape of her cheekbones, the slant of her eyes, the smile that captivated a padishah. Here, however, history runs into ethics, politics, and the silence of the centuries. Opening the tomb of an Ottoman sultana is an exceedingly delicate matter. It is not merely a scientific act, it is a gesture with colossal historical, religious, and social resonance. Do we need the real features if we have already crafted her into a myth? Would the truth destroy the very magic that has fueled series, books, and our imaginations for centuries? The truth will most likely remain there, in the cool shadow of the mausoleum. And perhaps that is her most accurate portrait. Not beauty, nor ugliness, but strength. A strength so enduring that it makes us argue about her appearance 5 centuries later. A strength that turned a slave girl into a sultana, and a sultana into an eternal story. Her real face will forever be hidden from us by a veil of time, rumors, and her own indomitable will. We look at her and see what we want to see. A cunning intriguer, a romantic heroine, a genius of power. And all these faces, in a sense, are the real Hürrem, because her essence lies not in her features, but in that bottomless complexity which continues to be reflected in our culture, like in the endless facets of a diamond.